The United States of War? Professor David Vine drops in to talk about this. It's an extraordinary conversation. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Talking about the United States of War in this hour, Professor David Vine, to kick us off here. He's a professor with the Department of Anthropology at American University, the author of a brand new book, The United States of War, A Global History of America's Endless Conflicts from Columbus to the Islamic State. For those of you watching us on television or Free Speech TV, Dish, Direct, YouTube, whatever, it's over my shoulder here. Professor Vine, welcome to the program, first of all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. David S. Vine, by the way, is Professor Vine's Twitter handle if you want to reach out to him. Professor Vine, how would you characterize the United States' relationship to war compared to most other developed nations?
Well, that's a hard question. I think the best comparison is probably to compare the United States to other empires. One of the things that was a surprise to me when I started my research was that the past 19 years of war, in which the United States has been fighting continuously since the U.S. military invaded Afghanistan in October 2001, is not exceptional in U.S. history. That if you look at the whole scope of U.S. history, the U.S. military has been fighting in all but 11 years of U.S. history in some form of war or other combat. And that's about 95% of the years in U.S. history. In recent years, though, I think it is probably the best comparison to look at the U.S. track record when it comes to war. The increasing people frighteningly talking about a war between the United States and China or a growing Cold War with China. China last fought a war outside its borders in 1979. The book is far from an argument in favor of Chinese foreign policy or anything about China. The book is really looking carefully at why the United States government has so consistently sent its military to fight in foreign lands. And ultimately, I hope the book makes some contribution to making U.S. foreign policy a far more peaceful endeavor.
Well, I know in my lifetime, I was a little kid when Dwight Eisenhower called out the military-industrial complex. There's money to be made in war. That's obviously, an incentive for the United States to go to war, or at least to prepare for war. And the military-industrial complex is no slouch when it comes to lobbying. Then also you've got presidents who think that being a wartime president, George W. Bush made this comment to Mickey Herskowitz, his biographer that his parents had hired to ghostwrite his autobiography, a Charge to Keep. This is in 1999, a year before he was nominated to run for president. And he said, if I become president, I'm going to have a war in Iraq, and it's not going to last 3 days like my dad did. He blew his political capital. I'm going to have a war that lasts until the next election so I can get reelected, which he did. So, clearly, and Donald Trump on multiple occasions when Barack Obama was running for reelection in 2012, tweeted that he was expecting Obama to start a war at any moment because that's how American presidents get reelected. So those are two clear forces. I'm lacking a word here, but things that would incline us toward war, I suppose, internally. What else is there?
Well, I think you pointed to two of the big ones. That economic and political interests have been major drivers behind this history of war, both recent wars and the whole long history of U.S. wars. That the military-industrial complex in particular that President Eisenhower warned us against as he was leaving office has only grown in power since the time of Eisenhower and really has taken on sort of Dr. Strange-Levian significance and power. Just look at the size of the U.S. military budget now, around $740 billion a year. And what are the threats that face us today? They are nothing like that facing us during the Cold War when there was another empire, the Soviet Union, facing off against the U.S. government. Meanwhile, our military budget has reached the heights of the Cold War. Indeed, politicians, frighteningly, both before when they're running for president and when they are in office, see the power of war and the U.S. American psyche. They see the political advantage to be gained from launching wars, which again is a much longer term pattern. I think we also have to pay attention to the role of race and racism. That if you look at the pattern of war, the U.S. military has been invading the lands almost exclusively of people of color around the world, and racism you can see as a clear through line from the earliest wars against Native American peoples to the peoples in Afghanistan and Iraq. And if you just look at the kinds of slurs that sadly U.S. military personnel frequently use to describe Iraqis or Afghans, they are eerily familiar and similar to those used against Native American peoples, to those used against Filipinos during the war between 1899 and 1913. So racism, as well as gender and the desire to sort of demonstrate one's masculinity, are other really critical factors in explaining this long pattern of war.
And do you recall what the what the Pentagon budget was at the end of the Clinton administration? My recollection was it was around $350 billion. It was about half of what it is now. Am I remembering right?
That's exactly right. There was, at the end of the Cold War, there was a call for a peace dividend, and there were some significant reductions in the size of the military budget and the number of U.S. military bases abroad. But basically, the system of war continued after the Cold War. There was no structural transformation. It just sort of shrunk a bit in size, but the basic structure of war, including the general power of the military-industrial complex, remained in place. And that, I think, is part of what needs to change now, and beginning with people in the United States demanding a peace dividend again. I think we only need to look at the COVID pandemic to see that all this spending, literally trillions of dollars spent on war since 2001, $6.4 trillion on the war on terror since 2001, has not protected us against COVID, has not protected us against pandemics. Our priorities have been totally out of whack with the needs of people in the United States and around the world.
And the threats that we're facing. This morning, I believe it was in the Financial Times, there was a piece about how China is leaking news about how they're building up their military forces on the parts of their coast that face Taiwan, and that they may be anticipating a military incursion in Taiwan. And I'm reading this wondering, what does this mean for U.S. foreign policy? It sounds, given this context, it might be another opportunity to ramp things up. In the 45 seconds we have left before we hit a hard break here, Professor David Vine, what can we do? What can the average American do to try to stop this madness?
Well, I think we have to demand. Yeah, I think we have to demand our money back. We have to stop what Eisenhower described as the theft of our money and the allocation of our tax dollars to the military-industrial complex, and to redirect money toward taking care of the real threats that face us and the real human needs when it comes to our education, our healthcare, while demanding that U.S. leaders not lead us into yet another war with anyone, least of all China.